You ready for this?
No.
You think this is one of the scariest things that you've ever had to do in your life?
I can honestly say, yeah, it is.
When we get to the bridge, it's gonna be fucking scary.
Yeah.
We're gonna be crossing the Crescent City Connection.
Yeah,
These people,
the situation
animals.
is everybody who's stuck on this side of the river without transportation is in the area that we're going to right now. And
Walking, desperate, without food or water.
haven't eaten in a few days, haven't drank in a few days. You know, so it's gonna be a pretty desperate situation when we get there. And I can honestly say I have no qualms about shooting anybody. It's just that much lawlessness right now.
They'll have no mercy for us.
No, we have no fear. We will shoot first and find out
I'll shoot
later.
first, ask questions later.
Right.
To shoot, to put them down. We didn't try to shoot to kill.
Oh, okay. Did you
We killed a number of them.
How many did you kill roughly?
Cash. No. Cash. Matter.
Yeah, I hear you.
It doesn't matter. They chose to die. They chose to commit suicide.
How do you know the vigilantes? You see them. How they patrol around here in trucks. 4-ton truck. Driver and a passenger. And then 2 in the back with long guns. And nobody telling them anything.
It was no police. No police, no army, and no National Guard, nobody. Then they put in a shoot to kill curfew. A dusk to dawn, shoot to kill. But there's nobody left.
Young blacks was being killed in this community. When you hear the gunfire, it's not something I'm just making up. It's out there.
It was great. It was like pheasant season in South Dakota. If it moved,
Get out. How are we going to get out?
look, we this high in water. We grab what we get.
How long you been walking for?
About at least 3 hours.
They weren't gonna go in those doggone neighborhoods. They weren't gonna impact those neighborhoods. Those people were looking to escape, and they cut off the last available exit route.
Look at my people. I got 2 grandchildren, a nephew, another nephew right there. We got trying to get the old folks out. If I stay up here, I'ma die. If I go that fucking way and they shoot me now, I'ma die. So I'ma die any fucking way. You gonna tax me anyway. But whatever it takes for me to get mine out here, I'm getting the fuck out here. You heard me? I wouldn't give a fuck. I gotta go.
Watching this video left me in shock. Like, I had to question, I'm like, are these videos real? Because, you know, in this age of AI and stuff, anybody can make a video looking like anything and whatever, right? You know, when Hurricane Katrina happened, I was 9 years old and I lived all the way up in Detroit. So it's not like we were anywhere around the area. So I vaguely remember us talking about it in school and maybe seeing it on TV, right? But that's kind of it. Now, you know, if I lived closer to where Katrina happened, I'm sure like it will be, you know, more deeply implanted in my mind, right? But I'm like at a loss because even between now and then, because it's been almost 20 years, right? I've never heard anybody say anything about white people going out and shooting black people who were needing help and stuff, right? So I went and I Googled this, like, did this actually happen? And yes, it did. I should do is explain why I was kind of in disbelief listening to this, because honestly it's not that out of the ordinary with, you know, how white people act, right? I was in such disbelief because it's always shocking to realize how much white people hate black people. And it's crazy because you all will come to my YouTube channel all the time and pretend that I am like the biggest oppressor. Oh, Flower Tower hates white people, I'm oppressed, oh my God, so and so and so. But y'all know good and well, forget about Flower Tower, forget about me, right? Because y'all don't know me personally, right? Y'all know good and well, if a natural disaster affected white people, black people would not be going out of our way to shoot them for no reason. Y'all know good and goddamn well that would not be a thing. That is what I always stress. There is no reverse of racism because black people don't even think like y'all. That is the reality of the fact. And I'm not just saying this to push any points or anything, but that is a fact. I say all the time, the average black person cannot even begin to understand how much the average white person hates black people. I say that all the time, right? And that's something that I still struggle to like recognize, even as, you know, in tune with this stuff as I am. Like, I study this and I pay more attention to this than the average person. And it's still hard for me to wrap my head around because it's like, again, like, what is going on here, right? And this is my thing. I understand that in a life or death situation, sometimes it becomes kill or be killed, right? But based off of these conversations and these clips, that is not what was happening here. You see one white guy talking about, yeah, it was like pheasant season in South Dakota or whatever he said, like he was hunting animals. It wasn't about like, oh, you know, these people swarmed me because I had food and, you know, I really feared for my life and I had to do what I had to do. No, it wasn't about that. Like, there's a clip of a black man with his whole family. He says, oh, my, you know, my nephew, my so-and-so, we try to get the elders across, yada, 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 right? His whole family. He says, if I sit here, I'm going to die. If I try to go that way, they going to shoot me, I'm going to die. Like, either way, I'm going to die, right? So you understand it's not about, oh, like, yeah, these black people swarmed me and I was in defense of myself or whatever. How some of the white people tried to paint it in their clips, right? Because there was like one of them who was like, oh, you know, like it's lawless out here. Like if somebody come at me, it's yada, 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 right? But look, let's look at the historical lens, right? Something white people have always done is paint themselves as the victim. They could form a lynch mob of 1,000 people and go after 10 black folks, right? And then when they publish the newspapers, they're going to be like, oh, yeah, we valiantly defended ourselves against this black mob and so and so and so, right? So, you know, on one hand, I understand it was a natural disaster and people were hungry and maybe folks were fighting, oh, you got food, oh, you know. But on the other hand, I know good and well that even if that's not the case, white people are going to pretend that it was, because no matter what, white people always paint themselves in the role of the victim. And like you hear that black man saying, he's simply trying to cross the bridge or whatever. Like the narrator or somebody said, they closed off the only exit, right? It was people just trying to cross wherever to get to safety and were being shot down. So this cannot be about, oh, these people came at me because, you know, I had supplies and they wanted them or something. It cannot be just about that, if it is about that at all. This is the thing. I talk all the time about transgenerational trauma. And if y'all have heard me have this conversation before, y'all can fast forward a little bit, right? But there are these studies about something called transgenerational trauma, right? Which basically means the trauma that your ancestors endured can affect you, okay? So in the example of transatlantic slavery, black people's ancestors went through horrific things. Imagine how scary it was watching a lynch mob form, right? Imagine you lived in some town that got burned down by a white mob and you ran away and you survived, right? And you look back and the last thing you see is white folks shooting black folks and stringing them up from trees and stuff, right? Imagine how terrified the average black person had to be during slavery, Jim Crow, etc., 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 right? Your ancestors passed all of that stuff down to you. Like, these people are now doing studies on black Americans and they're showing, yeah, black Americans still have like elevated trauma responses and stuff because of what their ancestors endured, right? And the thing that I always notice about these studies is that they only ever study the victim. So in the case of transatlantic slavery, they only study black people, right? And these conversations are not always about transatlantic slavery. It can be about sexual assault victims, people who experience famines, prisoners of war, etc., etc., etc. But one thing remains true. Only the victims are ever studied. Like, literally, right? So I have to ask myself, do I really believe that transgenerational trauma only works in one direction? It only affects the victims. It doesn't affect the people who were doing the victimization. Like, really? So back in the scope of transatlantic slavery, you telling me that I, the descendant of enslaved black Americans, right? I still have trauma from my ancestors to this day, right? They passed down all that fear and all of that, you know, stress and all of that, everything. They passed that down to me, right? But you telling me that the descendants of white Americans, they didn't get passed down anything from their ancestors? That's what you telling me, right? So my ancestors were able to pass down that they were so scared and they were terrified and this, that. But white people's ancestors didn't pass down none of that hatred, none of that aggression, none of that rage, none of that anything. That just doesn't sound believable at all. And when you look at the current state of affairs today, that doesn't align with reality at all. Because like I said, if a natural disaster affected white people, do you really think that black people would be shooting them for no reason and talking about, yeah, it's like pheasant season in South Dakota or whatever? You don't even believe that. You look, you can sit here and lie in the comments and pretend if you want to, right? But you, God, and the devil know what's actually going on in your head. You don't even believe that this shit would ever happen in reverse. Take a second to go Google whatever. I just Googled, do white people lack empathy, right? And a million studies popped up talking about, oh yeah, well, you know, cross-cultural racial bias may indeed show that white people feel less of a response when they see black people in pain, so and so, yada, 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 right? Even white scientists will tell you that white people lack empathy when it comes to other groups of people, right? And that's not the case when it comes to black people and other groups of people. Y'all can talk as much shit as y'all want to talk about Flower Tower. Maybe you don't like my delivery. You think that I'm mean. You think that I'm rude. You think that I'm whatever, bitch. But the fact remains that you don't have the backing that I have to sit here and pretend that you are oppressed in the way that I am. To bring your stinking ass up under my YouTube channel talking about, this is Flower Tower, like, you're a racist. I'm oppressed here. It's just like, yo, I'm always talking about these switcheroonies that y'all be pulling. This is a vast switcheroony in the works, bro. How can you ever sit here and pretend, ever, that you are at all in any way going through what black people go through at the hands of white people? Like, what are we talking about here? This is why I always say white people live in the same world as me. So if a white person is sitting around talking about, oh, racism doesn't exist, it's gully G Willikers, like, I didn't see color, I know that they full of crap, because you sitting here saying something that is directly in your face is not real. Now, this is my thing. If I sit here and I say, like, I'm sitting here looking at my dresser, there is no dresser in this room, right? Does that mean that the dresser actually disappeared? Or does that mean that my ass just can't see? So even if you sit here and you say, oh, there's no lamp in this room, the lamp is still there. Either you can't see it or you're just lying. So, like, that didn't actually change anything that is going on here. What are we talking about? Go ahead and Google, did white people shoot black people during Katrina? The AI overview. Granted, AI is dumb because something just recently happened and it directly contradicted itself. But anyway, it says, yes, there were documented instances of white individuals shooting at black people in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina. Specific details of these incidents include: 1. Algiers Point. A significant number of the reported shootings occurred in the predominantly white neighborhood of Algiers Point in New Orleans. 2. Roland Bourgeois Jr. A white resident, Roland Bourgeois Jr., was charged with firing a shotgun at 3 black men who were trying to evacuate the area. He subsequently pleaded guilty to a hate crime and illegal weapons use and was sentenced to 10 years in prison. He died shortly after his sentencing. 3. Vigilante activity. Reports describe white vigilante groups forming and using force against black residents entering their neighborhoods, fueled by fears and racist beliefs. There are reports of these groups setting up barricades and engaging in violence against people perceived as outsiders. And 4, media coverage and investigations. While initial reports of violence were sometimes exaggerated, investigations by organizations like The Nation magazine and ProPublica highlighted instances of racially motivated attacks that had been largely overlooked. The federal government subsequently initiated investigations into some of these incidents. Let's read from an article on ProPublica really quickly. The way Donnell Harrington tells it, there was no warning. 1 second he was trudging through the heat, the next he was lying prostrate on the pavement, his life spilling out of a hole in his throat, his body racked with pain, his vision blurred and distorted. It was September 1st, 2005, some 3 days after Hurricane Katrina crashed into New Orleans, and somebody had just blasted Harrington, who is African American, with a shotgun. I just hit the ground. I didn't even know what happened, recalls Harrington, a burly 32-year-old with a soft drawl. The sudden eruption of gunfire horrified Harrington's companions, his cousin Marcel Alexander, then 17, and friend Chris Collins, then 18, who are also black. I looked at Donnell and he had this big old hole in his neck, Alexander recalls. I tried to help him up and they started shooting again. Harrington says he was staggering to his feet when a second shotgun blast struck him from behind. The spray of lead pellets also caught Collins and Alexander. The buckshot peppered Alexander's back, arms, and buttocks. Harrington shouted at the other men to run and turned to face his attackers, 3 armed white males. Harrington says he hadn't even seen the men or their weapons before the shooting began. As Alexander and Collins fled, Harrington ran in the opposite direction, his hand pressed to the bleeding wound on his throat. Behind him, Harrington says the gunman yelled, "Get him! Get that nigger!" The attack occurred in Algiers Point. The Point, as locals call it, is a neighborhood within a neighborhood, a small cluster of ornate, immaculately maintained 150-year-old houses within the larger Algiers district. A nationally recognized historic area, Algiers Point is largely white, while the rest of Algiers is predominantly black. It's a white enclave whose residents have a kind of siege mentality, says Tulane University historian Lance Hill, noting that some white New Orleans think of themselves as an oppressed minority. So you going after folks with shotguns while they just trying to cross the safety, but you the oppressed minority. And that's what I be talking about these switcheroonies. White people always paint themselves as the victim, but let's continue to read. A wide street lined with towering trees, Opelousas Avenue, I don't know what that said, marks the dividing line between Algiers Point and Greater Algiers, and the difference in wealth between the two areas is immediately noticeable. On one side of Opelousas, it's hood. On the other side, it's suburb, says one local. The two sides are totally opposite, like muddy and clean. Algiers Point has always been somewhat isolated. It's perched on the west bank of the Mississippi River, linked to the core of the city only by a ferry line and twin gray steel bridges. When the hurricane descended on Louisiana, Algiers Point got off relatively easy. While wide swaths of New Orleans were deluged, the levees ringing Algiers Point withstood the Mississippi surging currents, preventing flooding. Most homes and businesses in the area survived intact. As word spread that the area was dry, desperate people began heading toward the west bank, some walking over bridges, others traveling by boat. The National Guard soon designated the Algiers Point ferry landing an official evacuation site. Rescuers from the Coast Guard and other agencies brought flood victims to the ferry terminal, where soldiers loaded them onto buses headed for Texas. Facing an influx of refugees, the residents of Algiers Point could have pulled together food, water, and medical supplies for the flood victims. Instead, a group of white residents convinced that crime would arrive with the human exodus sought to seal off the area, blocking the roads in and out of the neighborhood by dragging lumber and downed trees into the streets. They stockpiled handguns, assault rifles, shotguns, and at least one Uzi, and began patrolling the streets in pickup trucks and SUVs. The newly formed militia, a loose band of about 15 to 30 residents, most of them men, all of them white, was looking for thieves, outlaws, or as one member put it, anyone who simply didn't belong. The existence of this little army isn't a secret. In 2005, a few newspaper reporters wrote up the group's activities in glowing terms in articles that showed up on an array of pro-gun blogs. One Cox News story called it the ultimate neighborhood watch. Harrington, for his part, recounted his ordeal in Spike Lee's documentary, When the Levees Broke. But until now, no one has ever seriously scrutinized what happened in Algiers Point during those days, and nobody has asked the obvious questions. Were the gunmen, as they claim, just trying to fend off looters, or does Harrington's experience point to a different, far uglier truth? Over the course of an 18-month investigation, I tracked down figures on all sides of the gunfire, speaking with the shooters of Algiers Point, gunshot survivors, and those who witnessed the bloodshed. I interviewed police officers, forensic pathologists, firefighters, historians, medical doctors, and private citizens, and studied more than 800 autopsies and piles of state death records. What emerged was a disturbing picture of New Orleans in the days after the storm, when the city fractured along racial fault lines as its government collapsed. Harrington and Alexander's experience fits into a broader pattern of violence in which evidence indicates at least 11 people were shot. In each case, the targets were African American men, while the shooters, it appears, were all white. The new information should reframe our understanding of the catastrophe. Immediately after the storm, the media portrayed African Americans as looters and thugs. Mayor Ray Nagin, for example, told Oprah Winfrey that hundreds of gang members were marauding through the Superdome. Now it's clear that some of the most serious crimes committed during that time were the work of gun-toting white males. So far, their crimes have gone unpunished. No one was ever arrested for shooting Harrington, Alexander, and Collins. In fact, there was never an investigation. I found this story repeated over and over during my days in New Orleans. As a reporter who has spent more than a decade covering crime, I was startled to meet so many people with so much detailed information about potentially serious offenses, none of whom had ever been interviewed by police detectives. Hill, who runs Tulane's Southern Institute for Education and Research and closely follows the city's racial dynamics, isn't surprised the Algiers Point gunmen have eluded arrest. Because of the widespread notion that blacks engaged in looting and thuggery as the disaster unfolded, Hill believes many white New Orleans approved of the vigilante activity that occurred in places like Algiers Point. By and large, I think the white mentality is that these people are exempt, that even if they committed these crimes, they're really exempt from any kind of legal repercussion, Hill tells me. It's sad to say, but I think that if any of these cases went to trial, and none of them have, I can't see a white person being convicted of any kind of crime against an African American during that period. You can trace the origins of the Algiers Point militia to the misfortune of Vinnie Purville, a 52-year-old building contractor and real estate entrepreneur with a graying buzz cut and mustache. Purville says he lost his Ford van in a carjacking the day after Katrina made landfall when an African-American man attacked him with a hammer. The kid whacked me, recalls Purville, who is white, hit me on the side of the head. Vowing to prevent further robberies, Purville and his neighbors began amassing an arsenal. For a day and a half, we were running around getting guns, he says. We got about 40. Things quickly got ugly. Purville remembers aiming a shotgun at a random African-American man walking by his home, even though he knew the man had no connection to the theft of his vehicle. I don't want you passing by my house, Purville says, he shouted out. Purville tells me he feared goons would kill his mother, who was in her 70s. We thought we would be dead, he said. We thought we were doomed. And so Purville and his comrades set about fortifying the area. One resident gave me video footage of the leafy barricades the men constructed to keep away outsiders. Others told me they created a low-tech alarm system, tying aluminum cans and glass bottles together and stringing them across the roads at ankle height. The bottles and cans would rattle noisily if somebody bumped into them, alerting the militia. Purville and his armed neighbors point to the very real chaos that was engulfing the city and claim they had no other choice than to act as they did. They paint themselves as righteous defenders of property, a paramilitary formation protecting their neighborhood from opportunistic thieves. I'm not a racist, Purville insists. I'm a classist. I want to live around people who want the same things as me. In a country with a racial wealth gap, racism and classism are the same thing. Nathan Roper, another vigilante, says he was unhappy that outsiders were disturbing his corner of New Orleans and that he was annoyed by the National Guard's decision to use the Algiers Point ferry landing as an evacuation zone. I'm telling you, it was 40-50 people at a time getting off these boats, says Roper, who is in his 50s and works for ServiceMaster, a house cleaning company. The storm victims were hoodlums from the lower 9th Ward and that part of the city, he says. I'm not a prejudiced individual, but you just know the outlaws who are up to no good. You can see it in their eyes. The militia, according to Roper, was armed with handguns, rifles, and shotguns. He personally carried a .38 in my waistband and a little Uzi. There was a few people who got shot around here. Roper, a slim man with a weathered face, tells me. I know of at least 3 people who got shot. I know one was dead because he was on the side of the road. During the summer of 2005, Harrington was working as an armored car driver for the Brinks Company and living in a rented duplex about a mile from Algiers Point. Katrina thrashed the place, blowing out the windows, pitching a hefty pine tree limb through the roof, and dumping rain on Harrington's possessions. On the day of the shooting, Harrington, Alexander, and Collins were all trying to escape the stricken city and set out together on foot for the Algiers Point ferry terminal in hopes of getting an evacuation bus. Those hopes were dashed by a barrage of shotgun pellets. After 2 shots erupted, Collins and Alexander took off running and ducked into a shed behind a house to hide from the gunmen, Alexander tells me. The armed men, he says, discovered them in the shed and jammed pistols in their faces, yelling, "We got you niggers, we got you niggers." He continues, they said they was going to tie us up, put us in the back of the truck and burn us. They was going to make us suffer. I thought I was going to die. I thought I was going to leave Earth. Apparently, thinking they caught some looters, the gunmen interrogated and verbally threatened Collins and Alexander for 10 to 15 minutes, Alexander says, before one of the armed men issued an ultimatum. If Collins and Alexander left Algiers Point and told their friends not to set foot in the area, they'd be allowed to live. Meanwhile, Harrington was staring at death. I was bleeding pretty bad from my neck area, he recalls. When 2 white men drove by in a black pickup truck, he begged them for help. I said, help me, I'm shot, Harrington recalls. The response, he tells me, was immediate and hostile. One of the men told Harrington, get away from this truck, nigger. We're not going to help you. We're liable to kill you ourselves. My God, thought Harrington, what's going on out here? He managed to stumble back to a neighbor's house, collapsing on the front porch. The neighbors, an African-American couple, wrapped him in a sheet and sped him to the nearest hospital, the West Jefferson Medical Center, where medical records show he was x-rayed at 3:30 p.m. According to the records, a doctor who reviewed the x-rays found metallic buckshot scattered throughout his chest, arms, back, and abdomen, as well as at least 7 pellets in the right neck. Within minutes, Harrington was wheeled into an operating room for emergency surgery. It was a close-range buckshot wound from a shotgun, says Charles Thomas, one of the doctors who operated on Harrington. If he hadn't gotten to the hospital, he wouldn't have lived. He had a hole in his internal jugular vein, and we were able to find it and fix it. After 3 days in the hospital, which lacked running water, air conditioning, and functional toilets, Harrington was shuttled to a medical facility in Baton Rouge. When he returned to New Orleans a month later, he paid a visit to the 4th District Police Station, whose officers patrolled the West Bank, and learned there was no police report documenting the attack. Harrington, who now has a wide scar stretching the length of his neck, says the officers he spoke with failed to take a report or check out the story, a fact that still bothers him. If the shoe was on the other foot, if a black guy was willing to go out shooting white guys, the police would be up there real quick, he says. I feel these guys should definitely be held accountable. These guys had absolutely no right to do what they did. Harrington, Alexander, and Collins are the only victims so far to tell their stories, but they certainly weren't the only ones attacked in or around Algiers Point. In interviews, vigilantes and residents, citing the exact locations and types of weapons used, detail a string of violent incidents in which at least 8 other people were shot, bringing the total number of shooting victims to at least 11, some of whom may have died. Other evidence bolsters this tally. Thomas, the surgeon who treated Harrington, staffed one of the few functioning trauma centers in the area, located just outside the New Orleans city line, not far from Algiers Point, for a full month after the hurricane hit. We saw a bunch of gunshot wounds, he tells me. There were a lot of gunshot wounds that went unreported during that time. Though Thomas couldn't get into the specifics of the shooting, I'm tearing up now, I can't even see it. Though Thomas couldn't get into the specifics of the shooting incidents because of medical privacy laws, he says, we saw a couple of other shotgun wounds, some handgun shootings, and somebody who was shot with a high-velocity missile and assault rifle round. The surgeon remembers handling 5 or 6 non-fatal gunshot wounds, as well as 3 lethal gunshot cases. In addition, state death records show that at least 4 people died in and around Algiers Point, a suspicious number given that most Katrina fatalities were the result of drowning and that the community never flooded. Neighborhood residents, black and white, remember seeing corpses lying out in the open that appeared to have been shot. I'm going to stop reading the article now because I didn't realize it was long as hell. Like, I'm not even joking. There's still a lot more of it to read, right? But I'm going to finish reading it on my own time, and I encourage you to as well. Like I said, the website is, hold up, let me get my glasses back on. It is ProPublica, and the article itself, let me scroll all the way back up, is called Post-Katrina, White Vigilante Shot African Americans with Impunity. Okay, so again, I encourage you to finish reading it, but I'm just going to close this video off by saying this. I have to repeat that the most offensive thing in the world for me is for white people to pretend that they at all, ever, in any capacity, are the victims in this system. Because, again, you can come to my YouTube channel and you can lie if you want to, right? Like I said, go ahead and talk that talk if you must, right? But the reality is that, you know, if something like Katrina happened to a white neighborhood, white people would be able to freely pass into a black neighborhood that was unaffected by the flooding. We would not be barricading it off, even though that was the only safe area around, right? And that goes back to the video in the beginning where that black man was like, I can't pass over there because they'll shoot me. If I stay here, I'm going to die, right? This all lines up, right? If something like this happened to white people, some natural disaster like Katrina happened to white people, black people would open our arms to help them, right? We would let them into our neighborhood. Hey, here's some food, here's some whatever, here's some yada, 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 right? And this is my thing. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to talk from the perspective of a woman really quickly, right? I understand the fear that you may feel in a situation like this, right? Because as a woman, if something like Katrina happens, I'm fearful. I'm fearful that men will hurt me, right? And that may very well happen, and that's a valid fear to have, right? But I would never take a gun and be patrolling and just shooting random men. Why would I do that? If I lived in Algiers Point, right, and I was fearful as a woman, what if a man breaks into my house and rapes me? And that's a very real, very valid fear to have, right? I wouldn't be patrolling the neighborhood shooting any man who comes in. No, I would stay in my house, make sure I have food and water for me, And I would just, you know, protect myself and mind my business. If you come up in my house, yeah, I'm shooting you. But if you just walking past and trying to, you know, get to a safe area, why would I be out trying to shoot you, right? Like, what are we talking about? And this is what I say all the time, bro. No matter what, white people in their story, they're always the victims. They can patrol a neighborhood with guns, shooting random people who are minding their business, and somehow they're still the victims in the situation. Like, it gets so frustrating to deal with.